Okay, hopefully that's recording now. Let me just double check. Yes, okay, it is recording. So I'm going to start the recording, and I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to go through what I wanted to share with you guys this evening. Remember, we started Learning Unit 6 last week, and I think both of you guys were online last week. Amita, I know you were. Diana, I don't think you were, but we started Learning Unit 6, so hopefully you've listened to the recording. And what I want to do this evening is to finish off Learning Unit 6 by going through the 3 investment appraisal techniques that we've got. So if you've got your textbook, my page number won't be the same as yours because I've got quite an old version. But in your textbooks, section 6.7, the investment appraisal techniques. It starts from that section. So we have got 3 techniques that you need to know. The first one is what we call payback period. And in your textbooks, you can study this in example 6.3. Then the second one is what we call the net present value calculation, which you guys have already done in the time value of money chapter. It's pretty much the same as that. And in this context, you can have a look at example 6.4, and that covers that technique. And then the third one is what we call the IRR technique, or internal rate of return. And the internal rate of return is covered in example 6.5 in your textbook. So those are the 3 examples that you can follow to make sure that you, and they use the same example through each of those, should I say they use the same data in each of those 3 examples. So you can then easily follow with one set of data how we can do the 3 different calculations. So what I have got is a past exam paper that has got questions in it for both the payback period and the net present value technique. And then I will just explain the IRR to you after that if we've still got time. So I'm going to go over to share my screen now so that I can show you that, that paper. Just get there. Okay, so hopefully you can now see my screen. The laptop is telling me that it's sharing. There we go. So I can hide that, and I'm going to go and open a question paper. Let me just hope that everything is still open here because there's some very weird things that have been happening. Okay, looks like they are both here. I think I must take my laptop in to somebody tomorrow and just let them give it an examination because I'm a bit worried. Okay, so this was, I think this was a 2020 exam paper. And as you can see, this question was out of 40 marks, and all 40 of these marks come from Learning Unit 6, which was the Capital Budgeting Applications chapter. So because the Learning Unit 6 and 7, what am I doing here? I'm going to the wrong place again. Yeah, no, it was question 2 I wanted, wasn't it? Yes. Because your Learning Unit 6 and 7 are the 2 that haven't been tested yet in either your first or second tasks. We usually get substantial questions from Learning Unit 6 and 7. So more so Learning Unit 6 than 7. Learning Unit 7 is quite a short chapter, and it's just kind of enhances Learning Unit 6. But also remember, in the exams, you will be tested on everything in the textbook, on all of the learning units. So you must prepare for everything. The only one that they tend not to ask too much on is Learning Unit 1, which is really just introduction, etc. But obviously, learning objectives, we must still be prepared for that. So in this question, we have got a case, they've given us a case study. And let me just show you what it is that the required is going to be. So question 2.1, they want us to calculate the payback period for the Durban facility. And then to advise whether, so here they've given us cash flow data for 2 facilities and payback period for the Durban facility, and then advise whether the company should select Durban to carry on with this particular project based on the payback appraisal method, and also providing a reason for saying yes, they should go ahead or they should not go ahead. So for 11 marks, you need to do the calculation. You need to make a decision whether they should accept the project or not. And then number 3, you should also give a reason. And then our other method, appraisal method, is calculate the net present value for Durban. In this case, they say using the financial calculator, which is the easiest method anyway. And then also advise whether they should select it and give a reason. In this one here, clearly show your inputs into the calculator, and in both instances, round to the nearest rand. And this one here was for 8 marks. The rest of this question, I'm not going to do this evening because the rest of these, the reinvestment approach and the break-even cash flow, these come from Learning Unit 7. So we'll do these 2 parts of the question next week. And this is a theory question over here. All right, so just this evening, I want to be able to complete these 2 over here, and then hopefully also explain the internal rate of return. Okay, so that's where we are. So let's have a look at what the scenario setting is. We've got Perfection Limited, an international kitchen appliance manufacturer, and they are considering entering the South African market due to demand for its appliances, which are being used regularly on cooking shows televised in South Africa. They have identified either Durban or Port Elizabeth as the site for their manufacturing facility. So we know that with financial management, most of what we do is to assist businesses in decision making. And this is why always in these questions that we get, they always ask us, do a calculation, make a decision, give a reason, because that's exactly what we have to do in a real life situation. The company's target payback period, so this is an important piece of information, and when using the payback period method in a question, they always have to give you the target. For Durban is 4.5 years. And the other bit of information that they have to provide us in a question is also what is the company's cost of capital, which is the same as saying what is their weighted average cost of capital, the WACC. Or we can also express it in questions. They can either say, what is the company's, they can say the weighted average cost of capital is 12%, or they can say the required rate of return of the company is 12%, or they can say the cost of capital is 12%. So just be prepared that any one of those 3 wordings or terminologies all mean the same thing. And that is always telling you which percentage to use for our discounting. Remember, in Learning Unit 2, they have to always give us a percentage of a cost of capital or a required rate of return of the investor, and we use that percentage then when we are going to calculate particularly a net present value. Okay, so we can see here, we've looked at the requirements, and we saw that required number 1 is to calculate the payback period for Durban. So we're going to use this 4.5 years as our target to compare against for that question. The second question said calculate the net present value of the project. So we know to calculate a net present value, we need to have a cost of capital. So we're going to use this bit of information here for question 2.2. Okay. Then independent researchers projected the following cash flows and they have to provide us with the cash flows for the next 8 years for the Durban facility. So Durban, they have given us 8 years worth of cash flow. PE, we're not going to worry about now. We'll do that next week. Perfection Limited expects to invest a further, and this is important because we have to adjust the cash flow, expects to invest a further 1.5 million in year 5 for Durban in order to upgrade the machinery in year 5. So basically they're saying we'll make an investment now at time 0, and then in year 5, we will have to have another cash outflow to the value of 1.5 million. And then important bit of information, this, in other words, this extra outlay that we've got to make in year 5 has not yet been included in our cash flows. So that means we still need to adjust year 5's cash flow. So they should have also put this in here. Our initial investment is always a cash outflow. So I'm just going to put brackets around that so that that's clear to you. Sometimes they do put brackets around it, or they put a minus in front of it. But you should understand, even if they don't do that in the question paper, that the initial investment, because they are calling it an investment, it means that is the company's cash outflow. So we have to invest into the project 25.5 million rand at time 0, year 0. Okay, this over here would be year 0. Initial is always year 0 or time 0. And then over the 8 years of the operations of the project, these are all where they say cash flows, and we can see these are all positive. So these are cash flows in. But then we must just remember, don't forget, year 5, in this year here, we are, in addition to the 6 million that will be cash inflow, we have to have a cash outflow also of the 1.5 million. So it will be 1.5 million cash flow out plus 6 million cash flow in year 5. So always pay attention to the information that you're given in a question like this so that you can pick up these extra bits of information. And you should also know your work so well that you immediately realize that the initial investment is a cash outflow and that these here are all cash inflows. Okay. So let me go to the solution for this question, and I'll use the solution to now explain payback period. So with the 3, sorry guys, I'm just trying to get this to move properly. With the 3 methods that we've got, when a company is appraising a new project, they can use one of the 3 methods, or they can use all 3 of the 3 methods, or more than one of them. Because each of the 3 methods, payback period, net present value, and internal rate of return, all tell us something different about the project. And they all have got different benchmarks that we are going to be measuring them against. So we saw in the question that for the payback period, they told us the target payback period is, what was it, 4.5 years? 4.5 years. So when we calculate payback period, our answer is going to be number of years. So what we are actually calculating in payback period is how many years of the operations of the project will it take before our initial investment is recouped. So in other words, at what point will we, at what point in time, in years, will we break even, where the net cash flow is 0? Because when we start out, our net cash flow is negative 25.5 million. Then you can see in year 1, we start getting a cash flow in. So our total net cash flow is then negative 21,300,000. So it's the initial negative, and then we start adding the cash flows, inflows as they take place. So as each year's cash flow takes place, our total initial investment, that negative, slowly gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So we are measuring how long will it take us to recover that 25.5 million rand that we initially spent in terms of all of the cash inflows that we will get over the life of the project. So if you remember correctly, this project was going to be active over 8 years. And in the answer here, we've only gone as far as year 6's cash flows. And that is because for payback period, we only want to keep calculating the cumulative cash flow until the first year that it turns positive. So we can see negative 25.5 plus 4.2 million, negative 21.3, plus 5.150 million, negative 16. At the end of year 4's cash flow, we were still negative by 5.05 million. Then in year 5, and remember, this is in year 5 where we had to take 6 million cash inflow, but remember to subtract that extra 1.5 million. So year 5's cash inflow is 4.5 million. When we subtract that from the 5, we're still left with a negative 550,000 at the end of year 5's cash flow. Then in year 6, our cash inflow is 6.35 million rand. So when we add that to our cumulative balance, at the end of year 6, we are now finally in positive territory. So what this means is that somewhere between the end of year 5 and the end of year 6, somewhere between those two timelines is when we eventually reached the point of cumulative cash flow being 0. Okay, so somewhere in there, it was 0 net cash flow. And that point where cash flow turns to become 0 is the break-even point that we're looking for in terms of payback period. But now we know that at the end of year 5, we were still negative. At the end of year 6, we were positive. So we want to know exactly how long was it where we reached that 0 point. So we know it's going to be 5 years and something months, because it's not as much as 6 years. By the time we reach 6 years, we're already positive. So we know it's going to be 5 point something decimal of a year, or 5 years and X number of months. And we want to work out what that is. So the way we do that is highlight the last year that we were negative. Okay, so there we were negative. So I highlight 5. Okay, here's my answer, 5 years. And highlight the next rand value of the cash inflow. And then we are going to say 5 years plus 550 as a percentage of the next cash inflow. So here you could see that here, 550 over 550, the last negative cash flow, over the next cash flow in. And that then tells us that the exact point that we reached 0 net cash flow was at 5.09 years. So that means it's going to take this project 5.09 years before it reaches that payback point. So remember, they told us that the target is 4.5 years, which means that we will accept all projects that reach payback point within 4.5 years. In other words, before 4.5 years or up to 4.5 years. But if the project takes longer than 4.5 years to reach payback point, we are going to reject it, because according to our target, that is going to be too long. And then we consider the risk too great and we won't take that project on. Okay, and this is according to the payback method. So remember, they said calculate the payback period. So here we've calculated it, 5 years, 5.09 years. They said make a decision. So we are saying don't select Durban. And then they asked us for a reason, and that is because the payback period for Durban is greater than our target of 4.5 years. You could also obviously convert this to months. You would just take 0.09 of 12 months, and that would tell you 5 years and X number of months. But it's absolutely fine just to leave it like this. But I've used my highlighter here specifically because the difficulty that students have when they, with payback period, you can see it's a very simple calculation. And your challenge is going to be just remembering what this, the format of this calculation here is when you're going to write it down. So use your highlighter, and you're just going to, when you practice, you are going to say, remember, highlight the last negative year, highlight the last negative cash flow, and then highlight the cash inflow of the immediate following year. And that gives you your calculation. 5 years plus 550 over 6350. 5 years plus 550 over 6350 equals 5.09 years. Okay, so how do you guys feel about the payback period? Is it still just the two of you guys online? I don't know where Chris has been lately. He was always in class and I haven't seen him lately. Anybody got any questions about payback? Are you guys happy with that one? It's not a very difficult calculation, so it's just a matter of practicing. And as I've showed you, just using something like that highlighting method as a memory jogger, so that you remember exactly what the calculation is to calculate that the value. So remember, with payback, with the payback period method, we are calculating number of years, and our target will also be given to us as number of years. So you can follow that in example 6.3, but also just do the, I told you guys to do the finish up last week for your homework, reading the components of an investment project's cash flow. So hopefully you did that, which was example 6.2. So read right from the start of section 6.7 in your textbook, so that you have got the background. And then they've given us write up a couple of paragraphs explaining the payback period and how it works and why we use it. And then over the page, they've also got the advantages and disadvantages of using the payback method. And then we have example 6.3. So make sure you cover all of that, the write up as well as the example, not just the example. And then that's followed by question 6.1 in your textbook, where you can then practice the payback method using question 6.1. And there's 2 machines there that you can practice using that method with. Although those are, that question 6.1 is a very simple question, but at least it will allow you to practice that calculation. Generally speaking, in an exam, they will give us a more complicated cash flow in a question than they've given us in question 6.1. So In other words, a cash flow, instead of in question 6.1, they've got the identical cash flow for every single year, just to simplify it. Whereas here in the question that we've got, each year's cash flow is different, and they've given us a little calculation to do in order to calculate the final cash flow for year 5 as well. So this is very typical of the question that you will get in exam for a payback period calculation. I haven't ever seen them doing it differently than this question here on screen at the moment. Okay, so then our second method is the net present value method. Over here, they've said calculate the net present value for Durban. This one here, they've specified using a financial calculator. So if they've specified using a financial calculator, then we must follow the instructions. And then again, they said advise whether they should select it and provide a reason. And then other instructions are clearly show your inputs into the calculator and also round to the nearest rand. So if you'll see question 2.1 said round to 2 decimal places, this says round to the nearest rand. That's because our answer to question 2.1 is number of years. Payback period's answer is always number of years, whereas a net present value calculation is always going to be a rand value. Okay. And it's exactly like calculating the present value of a mixed stream of cash flows. That's really exactly what we are doing in this question here. So if you remember from learning unit 2, our time value, all our different time value of money calculations, we had the future and present value of a mixed stream of cash flows. So for instance, in example 2.10 in learning unit 2, if you go there and have a look, that is the exact method that we are using for the net present value calculation. Mixed stream of cash flows means that the rand value of each year's cash flow is different, but they will give us the cash flows for each year. They have to give us an interest rate, cost of capital, required rate of return, WACC. They have to give us that so that we know what percentage to use to discount the cash flows, and we then calculate the present value of the cash flows. So again, if we go and have a look here, so remember for as I said, for question 2.1 with the payback, we only have to write the cash flows down until we go from negative to positive. You don't need to write the rest of the years down because you're not going to use them in your calculation. But for net present value, we are going to calculate the net present value for all 8 years of the cash flow. So everything must be there. Here is our initial cash flow out at time 0, and then our 8 years, and these are all cash flows in. And again, don't forget, they told us that in year 5, which wasn't included in the table that they gave us, we have to pay out an extra 1.5 million in year 5 as well. So the net cash flow for year 5 is going to be 4.5 million cash flow in. So for a financial calculator, this is what you would write down. The number of each year, like that, with initial being 0 times 0, and then the year number for each of the other cash flows with the rand value of each of those amounts. We would enter each of these amounts into our financial calculator using the enter button. If you've got your financial calculator handy, you'll see in my calculator, which is a Sharp EL738, bottom row of the small keys, the very last one on the right-hand side has got ENT on it. And underneath that, it says data. That's the key that we use to enter each of these amounts into our calculator. And also, guys, don't forget, before you start pressing any buttons on your calculator, you must first clear the memory so that any previous calculation you did has been cleared out of the memory of the calculator. Otherwise, it will corrupt your final answer. Then the other bit of information we're going to enter into the calculator is I or R. Remember, this is I with a dot on top of it, the letter I, or the letter R, which represents the percentage that we're going to use to discount the cash flows. And here they told us that the company has a cost of capital of 12%. So this is where we got that information from. So I is going to be 12. And then we are going to comp net present value. So that's all we have to enter into the calculation, into the calculator. The rand value of each year's cash flow, the percentage of the cost of capital, and then comp net present value. If you remember also when we did net present value, the present value of a mixed stream of cash flows in Learning Unit 2, what we've calculated here, if you have a look, you can see this net present value that we've calculated is a positive figure. It's plus 192,017. So the rule for making a decision when using the net present value method is that when we calculate the net present value, if the net present value is positive, then we must go ahead and accept the investment because the net present value is greater than 0. If the net present value was exactly 0, that would indicate a break-even cash flow from a net present value point of view, which means as soon as the net present value is higher than 0, it means that even while we discount all of our cash flows by our cost of capital, in other words, what we are doing is we are, over the life of the 8 years, we are deducting 12% from those cash flows to pay for our cost of capital, because out of these cash flows, we want profit, plus we have to pay for the capital cost. So the 12% is the capital cost, and if there's any money left over after paying for the capital, then that means that this 192,017 will be our profit. So this project, Durban facility, will give us a profit of 192,017 after paying for our cost of capital of 12%. The keystrokes on your financial calculator, and don't forget this 25.5 million must be entered in your calculator as a negative figure. You would type in on your calculator 25,500,000 minus, using that plus minus key. The key that looks like that on your calculator. You have to type it in after the number. So you would type in 25,500,000, and then you would press the plus minus button. And that would then enter that figure in your calculator as a negative. And then you press the enter button. Then you go right ahead and type in your calculator 4.2 million and again press the enter button. So you do that with all of these cash flows. Type in the amount and press enter. If in any question, sometimes in a question they'll have a negative cash flow in the middle of all of the years, then you would just enter that as a negative figure as well. And then when you get to the end and you have entered your last rand value, we then have to, let me see if I'm going to get space here. We then have to use your second function. So press the second function button right at the top left of your calculator, and then press the CFI button, which is in the middle row of the small keys, the very last key on the right-hand side. And then let me just double check. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm going to just enter something here so that I can check if I'm going to do this right. Second function, CFI. And then on the screen, you will see that the writing on the screen then says rate, and in brackets I/Y, and you then enter in 12 and press enter. Okay, so enter each rand value, press enter, rand value, press enter, rand value, press enter, all the way down to the last rand value, press enter. Press the second function button, press the CFI button, type in 12 and press enter. Then that has programmed into the computer your series of cash flows and the percentage discount factor that you want to use. Then I'm going to go over here because I've already typed in that word positive. After pressing 12 enter, you then press the, let me see if I've got a key that looks like that, press the down arrow. So right below the screen on your calculator, you've got 4 arrow buttons. You are going to press the down arrow just below your screen. And then you are going to press the comp. Press the down arrow and then press comp. And when you've pressed comp, this rand value of the net present value will appear on your screen. So you can see the solution that you write down on your answer book. You don't have to type in enter, enter, enter. They are happy that we give you the mark as long as you have the correct year, the correct amount next to the correct year number, and that the amount is correctly indicated as being either cash outflow negative or cash inflow positive, showing any workings that you've done, and that you underneath that you type in I or R or IY, and you write the correct percentage, and that you write comp NV and then the rand value that you've calculated on your computer. You don't have to type in all these enter, second function, etc. I'm just putting that there so that you guys know what buttons to press when you're doing this on your financial calculator. Okay, so as I say, also remember that this value that we've calculated here, 192,000 rand, that is a rand value. It's 192,000 rand that we've calculated, which means that there will be profit in this particular project. Okay, so this is our net present value method. This is our payback appraisal method. Payback appraisal method, our answer is number of years, and we compare it to the number of years target that they gave us. The net present value calculation, our answer is a rand value, and we will accept the project if the rand value is greater than 0. Okay. Then where are we now? We've got just a few minutes left. Then for the internal rate of return, which unfortunately they haven't asked us in this question, so we don't have it on screen. Our third method, internal rate of return, what we are going to, I'm just going to type it in at the bottom here. Internal rate of return, IRR stands for internal rate of return method. The answer is a percentage, which is I'm going to call it the intrinsic percentage profit of the project. So if you guys have got time, if you quickly go to example 6.5 in your textbook, just follow the, and also just go straight to the financial calculator version. I haven't got time to explain the interpolation method that they've got in those two tables. And remember, in an exam, unless they ask you for a specific method, you can use any method that you want for displaying the answer. And they will definitely, in internal rate of return method, they will never ask you for the interpolation method, purely because it is a long method and it's very fiddly, and it's not exact when you are trying to calculate it. So you will go straight to the financial calculator method. Okay, so use the financial calculator method. And there again, you can see you're going to do exactly the same thing. You are going to write in the left-hand side of the column the year number of each cash flow. So in example 6.5, we've got cash flow out at time 0, and we have got 4 cash flows in. I don't know if in the new textbook, if they've still got the percentage in that table, IYR 10. If it is there, scratch it out with your pencil. It should not be there, because that is what we are going to compute. Internal rate of return method, we are going to solve for the percentage. That is either I, Y, or R, or I, depending on which way you've learned it. Okay, so on our calculator, we're going to enter the cash flows, and only the cash flows, also using the enter button. When we've entered that last amount in your example 6.5, 135,000 Rand, press enter. You are then also going to press second function, CFI, and then you're going to go straight ahead and just press the comp button. And what the calculator will then return for you on the screen is a percentage. So in other words, then we have solved for the internal percentage of the project. And that percentage that it's giving us is the gross return. Okay, so in other words, we haven't yet taken off our cost of capital. So in example 6.5, the IRR is 14.59%. So that means the gross return of the project is 14.59% before paying for our cost of capital. And then, for instance, in this case, if our cost of capital was 12%, but the internal rate of return is 14.59%, we can say, yes, go ahead and do the project, because the internal rate of return is greater than our cost of capital. So the difference between 14.59 and the example of 12% of a cost of capital is 2.59%, which means our net profit would be 2.59% if we went ahead and did the project in example 6.5. Oh, sorry, I see in example 6.5, they've given us a WACC of 10%. So our project internal rate of return is 14.59%, which is 4.59% higher than our cost of capital of 10%. So yes, we can go ahead and do the project. I just want to see if I can fit this in here. Enter, ENT, enter each Rand value of cash flow, then second function, CFI and comp. And you will get your answer of the percentage that you want. Practice with your calculator with these examples in a textbook, because then you've got the answer right in front of you, so you can see exactly what your calculator should be giving you. And in that way, you can get used to using the calculator and always making sure that you clear the memory first before you enter any button. Oh, that's my wrong calculator. Let me go back here. On my Sharp calculator, to clear the memory, I just press the red on clear button, which just clears the screen to 0. But remember, when you've cleared the screen to 0, that's only the screen that's been cleared to 0. There will, because it's a financial calculator, there will be percentages and cash flows stored in the data, and that's what you've got to clear. So you press the second function button, and the button immediately below that, the green alpha button, and you'll see that on the screen 0 and 1 appears, and if you press 0 and then 0 again, that clears the memory. That's the quickest way to clear the memory on the Sharp. So second function, alpha, 0, 0, and your memories are cleared. Okay, don't neglect to do that, otherwise the other stuff that you write down will be all correct on your page, but you will obviously then just get the incorrect final answer. But you can have a look here. Even if you press wrong buttons, that final answer is a method mark, which means that even if you've done something incorrect on your calculator, you will still get full marks because you have used the correct method. Okay, sure. Guys, after starting late, we still managed to just finish by 7 o'clock. So the rest of this chapter, again, remember, read everything, the theory questions as well for your learning objectives that are theory, like particularly, and I should have put it up on the screen, your learning objectives for this chapter, advantages and disadvantages of the payback method is a learning objective. So make sure you always know that. And the same thing, advantages and disadvantages of the net present value method. That's also a learning objective. And then for the internal rate of return, we also have got advantages and disadvantages of that method. And they often combine those advantages and disadvantages of 3 different methods in another question. So make sure that you do know those advantages and disadvantages of all 3 methods, because they do often incorporate that into a question. And then you've got the revision questions at the end of the chapter. Practice with all of them. There are 7 at least in my book. And you know always that if you can do the revision questions at the end of your chapters in the textbook, that you will then be prepared for the exam. Okay, guys, I better stop talking because we've just gone over 7 o'clock in case someone has another class in the next time slot. So hopefully that has been helpful and that you have learned something about those 3 methods. You'll have the recording to go back to, and remember always any questions at all, give me a shout and I will help you. Okay, Armita, you're okay, no questions, and did you understand? You followed all of the explanations. Diana, you as well, are you okay? Did you understand all of the explanations? You managed to follow what I was saying? Okay, and remember, you've got your okay, perfect. You've got your textbooks, you've got the examples, and they're very good. They include everything that you need to master those methods. Okay, guys, thank you very much for being patient with the start of the class. Thank you very much for staying online and waiting for me while I battled. And I honestly really do appreciate that. And then I will see you guys next week, when we will look at those Learning Unit 7 calculations. Okay, thanks very much, guys, and I will see you next week.